The town of Evermere was the kind of place where time wandered, nestled between a lake that whispered secrets and the wind and hills that blushed with wildflowers in spring. It was the sort of quiet little world where everyone knew your middle name and your grandmother's pie recipe. For Lena Hart, it was home. Not just the place she had been raised, but the place that had steadied her after everything else fell apart. At 29, she had built a gentle rhythm managing the Evermere Community Library, volunteering at the annual poetry festival, and spending quiet evenings curled up with her grandmother's cat, Tilly, reading old letters or sketching flower patterns in the margins of forgotten books. It was a good life, safe, predictable, until the day the stranger with the crooked smile walked in and tilted her entire world ever so slightly off balance. Lena was at the front desk that morning, scanning in a stack of donated books. The library was hushed, as it always was before noon. Dust swirled lazily in the sunlight streaming through tall, arched windows. The smell of paper, pine wood, and coffee lingered like comfort. She didn't notice him at first. She was too focused on cataloging a faded volume of romantic poetry when the sound of boots on the old oak floor broke her concentration. She looked up and paused. A tall man stood by the local author's display, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, a weathered leather jacket half-zipped. His hair was the color of roasted chestnuts, tousled in a way that looked both effortless and maddeningly perfect. He wore glasses, slightly fogged from the cold outside, and he squinted at flyer about the Evermere Fall Reading Series. He turned toward her just as she was about to speak, and when their eyes met, something quiet and curious stirred between them. "Hi," he said, voice low and warm, like a familiar song you couldn't quite place. "Do you happen to know if this reading series is still accepting submissions?" She nodded, trying not to stare. "It is. We extended the deadline until Friday." A smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "Lucky me." He stepped forward and reached into his satchel, pulling out a small notebook. "I write a little. Thought I'd finally try reading aloud." Lena tilted her head. "New in town? Sort of," he said. "I used to come here every summer when I was a kid. My aunt owns the flower shop across the street. I'm staying with her for a while." "Let me guess," she said, smiling softly. "You're Ella's nephew." His eyebrows rose. "Wow, word really does travel fast here." "Small town magic," she replied. He grinned and extended his hand. "Julian Blake." "Lena Hart," she said, shaking it. His palm was warm, his grip easy. There was a moment, a flicker of recognition that neither of them could explain. Like they'd been characters in the same novel all along. Finally meeting on the same page. Julian returned the next day. And the day after that. He claimed it was to work on his poem submission for the reading series. But Lena noticed he always chose the table closest to the front desk. Always greeted her with a quiet, "Morning, Lena." Like he'd been waiting to say it all night. She learned that he was a songwriter who'd grown tired of the noise of city life. That he'd lost his father a year ago and hadn't picked up a guitar since. That he used to dream in music but had recently found comfort in written words instead. He learned that she loved pressed flowers and used old pages as bookmarks. That she once thought she'd be an art teacher. That she carried around a sketchbook she rarely let anyone see. They never said these things outright. But in the way they lingered a second too long. The way they exchanged books with quiet little notes inside. The way he started humming again when she was near. The heart whispers before it dares to speak. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled into Evermere, unexpected and bold. The sky turned pewter gray, and the rain fell in sharp bursts against the windows. Julian was packing up to leave when Lena rushed to the door. "Wait," she called. "You'll get drenched." He turned, amused. "I don't mind a little rain." She hesitated, then reached behind the desk and held out an old tartan umbrella. "Take this. It's not much, but it might help." Julian took it with a quiet smile, but instead of opening it, he simply stood there. "Do you want to walk with me? In the storm?" "It's not lightning," he said. "Just rain, and maybe a little adventure." She bit her lip. And then nodded. They walked beneath the umbrella, shoulders brushing, laughter rising between them like steam from the cobblestones. Raindrops tapped their coat sleeves, tangled in their hair. The streets shimmered silver, and the flower shop window glowed like a beacon behind them. As they reached the bridge that overlooked Evermere Creek, Julian stopped and turned toward her. He said softly, "I wasn't sure I'd ever feel grounded again." Lena's breath caught. "And now?" He looked at her, really looked. "I think I just heard my heart whisper something." She smiled, heart pounding. "Mine too." Lena's life in Evermere was like a watercolor painting, soft around the edges, filled with quiet depth. After losing her father at 16 and caring for her aging grandmother in her early 20s, she had learned to find comfort in stillness. Now at 29, she managed the Evermere Community Library, an old stone building with ivy creeping along its sides and stained glass windows that cast colored light across the oak floors. She loved the silence that lingered between the shelves, the feel of book spines under her fingers, the smell of paper and pinewood polish. She lived alone in a modest cottage near the edge of town, inherited from her grandmother, nestled between willow trees and a moss-covered garden path. Most evenings, she sat by the window with a cup of herbal tea, sketching wildflowers or rewriting old letters she found in library donations. An odd but lovely hobby she'd never explained to anyone. She wasn't lonely. At least not in the way most people think, but there was a space inside her, a quiet ache she couldn't name. A longing not for drama or chaos, but for someone who understood how words could mean everything. Someone who would hold her in silence and somehow hear everything she didn't say. Julian had once lived in the loudest cities, writing songs that topped charts, performing in packed lounges under blue and red stage lights. He had been a rising voice in the indie folk scene, known for lyrics that could slice open the heart and stitch it back together all in the same breath. But the industry took its toll. Overbooked nights, endless travel, constant noise. Then his father died suddenly, a stroke, while alone at their cabin in Vermont. Julian hadn't made it in time. He missed the last call, the final hug, the unsaid goodbye. Something inside him broke. He couldn't write, couldn't sing, couldn't pick up his guitar without feeling like every note echoed through an empty hallway. He took a break from everything: his label, the tour, the studio. He packed a single bag and came back to Evermere, where he had once spent boyhood summers in his aunt's flower shop. Ella, his aunt, welcomed him without question. "Stay as long as you need," she had said, handing him a cup of chamomile tea and a set of spare keys. Sometimes healing happens when nothing is forced. Now he lived in the small guest house behind her shop, working odd hours, fixing up the porch, helping with deliveries, and trying to find music again, not in chords, but in stillness. The town of Evermere had a rhythm of its own. It wasn't flashy or famous, but it held a kind of magic, a softness that healed with the world. Bruce. The cafe on Main Street still rang a brass bell above the door. The owner, Marcy, knew every resident's drink by heart and always left a piece of toffee shortbread for Lena. There was a bookstore, run by an elderly couple who spoke in riddles and stocked handwritten love poems from local authors in the back corner. The lake that bordered the town shimmered under moonlight like it held secrets, and the woods beyond whispered stories when the wind passed through the branches. Evermere didn't just exist, it held you. It remembered your birthdays, celebrated Your little victories, and offered quiet comfort when everything else hurt too loud. For Lena, life was routine but meaningful. Every Monday, she led children's story hour with animated voices and handmade props. On Thursdays, she hosted poetry circles for seniors who brought old love letters and tears in their eyes. She hadn't dated seriously in years. There were a few dates here and there, mostly polite, quiet evenings that ended with mutual thanks. But no spark. Lena had stopped expecting anything more. Instead, she poured herself into art, kindness, and restoring the old reading garden behind the library, one broken bench at a time. For Julian, his days were slower now. He helped Ella arrange bouquets in the mornings and delivered orders to nearby cottages in the afternoons. He'd spend hours walking the lake path, notebook in hand, writing fragments that sometimes rhymed and sometimes DIDN single quotes T.music still lingered on his fingers. But he wasn't ready to hold a guitar again, not yet. And yet, ever since that rainy afternoon at the library, a tune had started to form, gentle, lyrical, lingering in the back of his mind. Like the echo of a smile, they didn't plan to see each other again after the umbrella walk. But life, especially in a town like Evermere, had other ideas. Julian dropped by the library just to return the umbrella, though he stayed long enough to help Lena unpack a new box of donations and left with a stack of poetry books. Lena stopped by the flower shop just to say thank you for the bouquet left on the library desk, and stayed long enough to help Ella arrange blooms for a wedding. They began to find each other everywhere, at the cafe, the bookstore, the farmer's market. Their conversations were never rushed, always full of soft wonder and slow smiles, always just a little longer than expected. Why do you rewrite letters? He asked her one evening as they walked the creek path. Because words deserve a second chance, she replied, and he looked at her, then not just looked, but seen her, like maybe he too needed a second chance. The days that followed were stitched with small, quiet moments, fragments of time that might have seemed insignificant to anyone else, but slowly began to build something soft and shimmering between Lena and Julian. They didn't rush. They didn't name it, but the rhythm of their lives began to shift in harmony. Every morning, Julian would pass by the library on his way to the flower shop, always bringing something fresh: scones from Marcy's cafe, a newspaper folded to the crossword section, or a single wildflower wrapped in twine. And every time, Lena would smile like it surprised her, even when it had already started to feel like routine. It started with a broken bench in the back garden of the library. I think someone should restore this space, Lena murmured one afternoon, mostly to herself. Julian was sitting nearby, sketching lyrics in his notebook. Someone like you? He asked. She gave a soft laugh. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Then let's begin together. And so it became their quiet little project. On Sundays, they met in the garden with gloves and old tools, digging out weeds, repainting wooden planters, planting lavender and rosemary. They made a playlist of old love songs and classical instrumentals, playing it low on Julian's portable speaker. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't, but the silence never felt empty. It felt shared. One afternoon, Julian knelt beside her, brushing a streak of dirt from her cheek with his thumb. She looked up, startled not because of the touch, but because of how natural it felt. He held her gaze a second longer than necessary, then smiled, and kept working. Her heart didn't know what to do with the fluttering it felt every time he looked at her like that. Lena had organized the fall poetry reading series for 3 years now, but this time she felt something entirely new. Nervous. Excitement. Julian had submitted a piece, a poem called Stillness Holds You. She hadn't read it yet. He wanted it to be a surprise. The reading took place in the main hall of the library. Candles flickered in jars on every table. A soft scent of cinnamon rolls filled the air, courtesy of Aunt Ella's catering. Julian stepped up to the small wooden podium. He looked over the crowd, then let his gaze rest on Lena, seated in the front row, and he began to read Dot. His voice was gentle, steady. She carries the silence like a lantern, lighting every dark place I forgot I had. She doesn't speak loudly, but her presence hushes the storms in me. Lena felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to dot the words, knew where they belonged. That night, long after the last guest had left and candles had been blown out, Julian walked Lena home. A soft mist hung in the air, and the streetlights painted halos around them. They reached her gate, but neither moved to say goodbye. "You write beautifully," she said softly. "I only write what I feel," he replied. "It's easier than saying it. Why is saying it so hard?" "Because some feelings are too big for words, but when I'm near you, I think the words find me again." She felt the pull between them, gentle but unmistakable. The way his voice slowed when he spoke to her. The way her hands itched to reach for his and didn't. Not yet. They stood in that moment, quiet, hearts aching to speak louder than their lips dared. He stepped forward slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not rushing this," he said, voice almost a whisper. "I just want you to know I feel it too." Lena nodded, heart full and trembling. Dot, so did she. Over the following weeks, it became a dance of small gestures. Lena would find lyrics scribbled on bookmarks, tucked into books Julian returned. Julian discovered his favorite brand of tea, stocked in the library's break room after he mentioned it once. She started wearing soft, blue scarves. The color he'd once said reminded him of calm. He began sketching again, drawing a woman standing in a garden, always from memory. They had dinner together once at Mercy's Cafe, pretending it wasn't a date. But the candle flickered between them like it knew better. When their hands brushed across the table, neither pulled away. One Friday evening, a storm returned, this time heavier, thunder rumbling like distant applause. Julian showed up at the library soaked, holding a bag of takeout and 2 steaming drinks. "I brought reinforcements," he said, grinning. They ate cross-legged on the library floor, surrounded by books and candlelight. Outside, the rain created a rhythm that wrapped around them. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if—" Lena paused, staring into her cup. "If the timing had been different?" Julian looked at her carefully. "I think the timing is what makes this real," he said. "We both had to fall apart a little to understand how to hold something fragile." She met his gaze, feeling seen. "You think we're fragile?" she asked softly. "No," he said. "I think we're careful, and that's not the same thing." She reached for his hand, this time and this time he didn't let go. The days turned golden as autumn spread its color across Evermere. Leaves fluttered like confetti through the streets, and the wind carried the scent of cinnamon, pine, and change. The small town pulsed gently beneath this season of turning, and nestled within it, something tender and quiet grew between Julian and Lena. They no longer needed excuses to spend time together. He stopped by the library simply to see her smile. She began each morning, hoping he'd arrive with a story, a flower, or just his calming presence. Their conversations deepened, not just in what they said, but in the way they listened. There was always a hush between their sentences, as if the silence between them spoke too. One chilly evening, Julian invited her to the lake. The skies had cleared, and the stars looked like frost sprinkled across black velvet. He had set up a small bonfire by the water's edge and laid out thick blankets and a thermos of cocoa. Lena arrived, bundled in her olive green coat and knitted gloves, cheeks flushed from the cold. They sat side by side, watching the ripples shimmer under moonlight. "I used to come here with my dad," Julian said softly. "He used to say still water reflects more truth than storms ever could." Lena turned toward him. Do you still talk to him? Julian nodded slowly. All the time, just not out loud. She reached over and placed her gloved hand over his. He didn't speak for a moment. Just breathed. That kind of breath that fills more than lungs. It fills silence with understanding. Then he smiled faintly. Sometimes I wonder if he sent me back here, to slow down, to meet you. Lena's eyes welled slightly, but she didn't look away. Think, she said carefully, that we both came back to this place to remember who we were before they expected too much. Do you ever feel like you're afraid to want something too much? He asked. All the time, she whispered. Because what if you lose it? Julian looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he leaned forward, brushing his lips gently against her forehead. It wasn't a kiss of passion, it was something deeper. A quiet promise. They sat that way for a long time. No music. No noise, just the hush of water and heartbeat staring. To open in the following weeks, the garden behind the library bloomed into a mosaic of marigolds, trailing ivy, and soft lavender. The bench they had fixed became their bench. She'd often find him sitting there with his guitar again, not playing, just holding it. One afternoon, she arrived to find him humming softly, his fingers moving with new purpose. He looked up and smiled. I finally wrote the whole song. She sat beside him, curious. It's called The Sound of You. He played. And though the melody was simple, it sank into her chest like it belonged there. The lyrics spoke of gentle courage, quiet beauty, and a voice that made even silence feel full. When he finished, Lena blinked slowly. It's beautiful, she said. It's you, he replied. They had not said, I love you yet. But in every glance, every handwritten note left between the pages of returned books, every softly spoken goodnight, it was there. Unsaid, but fully known, he brought her flowers that didn't mean romance, but peace, respect, beginning again. She returned the gesture with a journal she'd hand-bound herself, leaving little quotes inside every few pages. They took walks through the woods, shared books and secret dreams, and once spent an entire Saturday painting ceramic mugs in the local art studio. Hers was a swirling sky with falling leaves. His had a single fox standing in the rain. What does it mean? She asked, tracing it gently with her fingertip. That even in the storm, he said, there's someone worth waiting for. Lena had always been reserved with her emotions. But with Julian, she didn't feel the need to hide. When she finally opened up about the fear she carried after her grandmother passed, that she'd spend her life quietly loved by everyone but never fully chosen by anyone, Julian listened, held her hand, and never once interrupted. You don't have to be loud to be worth hearing, he said. And later that night, she whispered to the stars, thank you for him. There were no grand declarations, just everyday magic. He taught her how to play a few chords on his guitar. She taught him how to press autumn leaves into handmade bookmarks. Together, they wove themselves into each other's lives in ways so natural, it felt as though their hearts had known this rhythm all along. They built traditions without realizing it. Tuesday night walks, Sunday evening cocoa, handwritten notes, left on cafe napkins. One afternoon, while helping Ella arrange bouquets for the winter festival, Julian found a sprig of rosemary tied with a lavender ribbon in his coat pocket, along with a note from Lena for remembrance. And because you always smell like peace. Their love wasn't built in fireworks or sudden passion. It was a slow-burning lantern in a dark room study, bright and unshakably warm. One night, as they sat in the garden under the lights they strung between the trees, Julian looked at her with an intensity she hadn't seen before. Lena, he said quietly, I think you saved me without ever trying to. She took his face gently in her hands, her thumbs brushing against his cheek. You didn't need saving, Julian. You just needed someone to remind you how to come home. He kissed her then, not for the first time, but for the first time, He meant forever. It wasn't hurried or desperate. It was full of breath, memory, stillness, and meaning. The wind rustled through the trees. The garden lights flickered, and beneath the stars, two hearts whispered what words were still too small to say. Love had arrived quietly, steadily, and now it had taken root. The first snow arrived quietly, flakes drifting like feathers, coating the town in a soft hush. Evermere transformed overnight into a scene from a snow globe. Children laughed in the streets, the coffee shop played vintage carols, and candles glowed from every window. For Lena, this time of year had always been her favorite. But this season, something unsettled stirred beneath the surface, like a song played a half step out of key. Julian had become distracted. He still came by the library, still smiled the same way, still left notes tucked inside novels. But there was a distance behind his eyes. He'd pause mid-sentence, check his phone more often, and cancel plans without much explanation. One evening, she waited at the garden bench long after the sun dipped behind the hills. He never came. She walked home, the cold biting through her. Gloves, her heart heavier than her footsteps. The next morning, he showed up with coffee and an apology. "I'm sorry. I got caught up in something," he said, eyes not quite meeting hers. "What's going on, Julian?" He hesitated. "There's a music producer in New York. He saw the video of the poetry night. Someone tagged him in a clip, and he reached out. He wants to meet, talk about a possible record." Lena blinked. "That's amazing." "It is. It's what I always dreamed of." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "So why do you look like someone just handed you a goodbye letter?" He exhaled. "Because it would mean leaving. For a while. And everything here. It's the first thing that's felt right in years." She nodded slowly, swallowing the ache rising in her chest. "How long would you be gone?" 6 months, maybe more. She looked at the snow melting on the windowsill, the way it clung for a moment before slipping away. "When do you leave?" "Next week." The silence between them stretched too long. Words wanted to form, but stayed caught behind fear and confusion. "I haven't said yes yet," he added. "I needed to talk to you first." "And what do you want me to say?" She asked gently, though her voice trembled. "That I'm okay with you leaving. I don't want to lose you, Lena, but I also don't want to wake up one day wondering if I could have made something more of myself." Her heart understood that too well. She had lived her entire adult life second-guessing her own chances. "At more, I would never ask you to stay," she whispered. "But what if I want you to?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with hurt. "Then you'd be asking me to carry the weight of your dreams if they don't work out. I can't be the reason you didn't try." His shoulders slumped. "So what are we supposed to do?" "I don't know," she said, the words barely a breath. For the first time since they met, Julian didn't have an answer. And for the first time, Lena walked away while he remained standing still. The week before his departure felt like walking on eggshells through fog. They still saw each other, still touched hands, exchanged looks, shared cocoa. But the spark the certainty had dimmed beneath the looming shadow of what comes next. Ella noticed first. She stopped by the library one afternoon and pulled Lena aside with a knowing look. "You love him?" she said simply. "I do." "So why does it feel like you're already grieving him?" "Because I think I am." Ella didn't try to fix it. She just hugged her tightly and left a bouquet of dried lavender on the counter before she left. That night, Lena reread the notes Julian had written her over the last few months. Each one a snapshot of their growing love. Each one a whisper she feared would become an echo. She folded them gently into an envelope and tucked it into the book where they'd first met. Leaves of Grass, a place where beginnings lived. Julian's. Bags were packed. The snow continued to fall. The day of his departure arrived with more stillness than ceremony. Lena met him at the train station, bundled in her thick coat, trying not to cry. "You're sure about this?" she asked, voice soft but steady. "No," he admitted. "But I think I need to do this. Not for the record deal. For me to prove that I can." She nodded, swallowing the emotion caught in her throat. "I don't want you to wait," he said. "Step in closer. I don't expect letters or promises or pauses in your life." "I wasn't planning to wait," she said, forcing a shaky smile. "But I also wasn't planning to forget." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver key. "What's this?" "The garden shed behind the library. I built something there. If you ever want to feel close to me, go inside." She clutched the key tightly. "I'll miss you." He leaned in and kissed her, not hurried, not desperate. Just one last thread, tying them together before the train pulled him away. As he boarded, neither said goodbye, because real love, the kind that's built on more than just time and touch, never truly ends. It waits quietly, like winter beneath snow, patient, enduring, and alive. Back in Evermere, time passed slowly. Lena returned to her routines, but her heart ached in quiet ways. She poured herself into the library, started a new book project for children, and began planting again seeds of both hope and healing. But every time it snowed, she missed him. Every time she passed the bench, or opened a book of poems, or heard his song in a cafe, her heart whispered his name, until one late afternoon, she found herself standing outside the garden shed with the silver key trembling in her hand. Garden shed stood in quiet stillness, half hidden beneath snow-dusted ivy and bare wisteria vines. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the world in soft amber hues. Lena stood at the threshold, fingers curled around the silver key Julian had given her weeks ago. Her heart thudded with both anticipation and ache. She slipped the key into the lock. The old door creaked open, the scent of cedar and something faintly citrus, his cologne, wrapped around her like a memory. Inside, the space was transformed. It was no longer a dusty tool shed. It was a sanctuary. Soft lights were strung along the beams. A small, refurbished desk sat under the window, with dried wildflowers in a mason jar and a stack of blank song sheets. There was a shelf with books hers, and next to them, a journal titled Whispers of the Heart. Inside, Julian had written letter after letter to her. Thoughts, sketches, lyrics, confessions. One page stopped her cold. A sketch of the garden bench, under starlight, with two figures sitting shoulder to shoulder. Below it, he had written, "If love is a song, then you are the chorus I never want to end." Her breath hitched, tears welled and fell freely. It had been 3 months. 3 long months of cold mornings and quiet nights. She missed him in every way a person could miss someone, his voice, his hands, his steady presence beside her. But this space, this hidden room full of his heart, reminded her that love, when real, never vanishes. It only waits for you to be ready. She stayed there for hours, reading, crying, smiling, until a soft knock sounded behind her. She turned, startled, and there he stood. Julian. Hair tousled from wind, a dusting of snow on his shoulders, eyes tired but alive. She didn't speak. She couldn't. "I tried," he said softly, stepping inside. "I gave New York everything I had. I wrote, I recorded. I stood in rooms full of people who clapped but didn't know me." He looked at her like she was a familiar song in a world full of noise, but I couldn't hear anything without you. Every lyric felt unfinished, every melody hollow. Lena's voice trembled. "Why now?" "I saw your name in the dedication of your new book," he said. "You wrote that it was for the ones who whisper instead of shout. And I realized I've always heard you, even from miles away." Her hands shook and her voice cracked. You left. I did, he admitted, stepping closer. And every second I was gone, I wished I hadn't. He took the journal from her hands, turned to a blank page, and wrote one sentence. I'm still choosing you. Tears spilled from her eyes again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from relief, from love, from finally being seen, fully and without conditions. I don't want you to stay because you failed there, she whispered. I want you to stay because you still believe in us. I never stopped. There. Foreheads touched Dot, and just like that, the silence between them cracked open. Not with noise, but with clarity. I kept looking for my future in cities, Julian murmured, but it's here. It's you. Lena cupped his face with both hands, her thumbs brushing away the cold. And I kept believing love was something that would fade. But it didn't. It just waited. A kiss, not desperately, but deeply. A kiss of returning, of remembering. Of promise that outside, snow fell again, gentle and unhurried. But inside, the shed, beneath a ceiling of old wood and new hope, two souls found their way back. Evermere bloomed early that spring. The snow melted in slow drifts, revealing crocuses and daffodils eager to greet the sun. The town emerged from its winter hush, and so did Lena and Julian. They spent their days walking hand in hand through the streets that once felt too wide for hearts so full of longing. Now the sidewalks carried the rhythm of their laughter, their steps in sync, their silences comfortable. Julian turned the shed behind the library into his official writing studio. Locals often passed by, smiling when they heard soft strumming or glimpsed the glow of lamplight spilling from the window. On weekends, he hosted small gatherings, acoustic evenings filled with stories and song, where Evermere's voices mingled. Like fireflies in dusk air. Lena, inspired by their journey, launched a new series at the library, Whispers of the Heart, dedicated to overlooked voices. Poets, shy teens, first-time authors, even grandmothers with handwritten lullabies were invited to share their stories. The library became not just a place of books, but a sanctuary for vulnerability and connection. They weren't in a rush. There was no grand proposal under fireworks, no movie scene drama, but one Sunday afternoon, Julian carved a picnic into their routine. He led Lena up the hill behind the garden where her mother's flowers once bloomed. There, under a willow tree beginning to bud, he laid out their favorite quilt, her sketchbook, and a plate of almond cookies. I know we never talked about what's next, he said, tracing the edge of her hand. But I know this, every future I imagine has you in it. She looked up, heart already full. I'm not asking you to give anything up, he continued. Not your stories, not your quiet, not your pace. Just let me walk beside you, wherever that leads. She smiled, through tears. You already are. He slipped a ring onto her finger, handmade, a band of intertwined silver and rose gold, with a tiny engraving inside. Still choosing you? There was no applause. No onlookers. Just the breeze, the trees, and two souls who knew they'd found home. Their wedding was small, intimate, held in the town's greenhouse among hanging ivy and candlelight. Ella read a poem. Mr. Pierce played a soft melody on piano. The mayor stumbled over his speech and made everyone laugh. Lena wore her mother's locket. Julian sang his vows, and when they kissed, it was not the start of something, but the continuation of something sacred. After the ceremony, they danced barefoot under paper lanterns while the town cheered. Not because of spectacle, but because everyone had witnessed love grow. Slowly and sincerely, like roots beneath their feet. Years passed. Gently, Julian's first album, Letters in the Garden, charted quietly but meaningfully. He never left Evermere again. Instead, artists came to him to learn how to create from honesty, Not ambition, Lena's children's book about a shy bird and a soft-spoken fox became beloved across schools. She wrote by the fireplace, surrounded by dried flowers and julians. Humming from the next room. Their home wasn't grand, but it had everything: shelves overflowing with poetry, windows that welcomed every sunrise, and a porch where they drank tea during rainstorms. On their 5th anniversary, Julian surprised her with a bench, an exact replica of the one in the library garden. But this one he carved himself, with a single phrase etched into the wood: some love shouts. Ours always whispered. They sat on that bench often, sometimes in silence, sometimes reading. Always together. And whenever anyone asked how they found something so lasting, Lena would smile softly and say, "It started with a whisper and grew into something we never had to raise our voices for, because some hearts don't need to be loud to be heard. Some love doesn't demand attention, it simply stays, ever constant, ever kind, ever theirs."